tell as a commissioner of police, tell the politician, back off. You have no knowledge of the law. You have no knowledge of law enforcement. You cannot force my officers to do the wrong thing.
But that is somebody's son. That is somebody's child. That is part of a family. And I think that is the part that they are missing out.
Because E and F are apt to be used oppressively.
It's like because we don't see disabled people as sexual beings, which is ridiculous.
You mean they don't want to listen to your version of science? They have their own science. You have your science.
What we need to do is teach people to think and not what to think.
Today, it's too bad that everybody do what they want.
If I could forgive Bernard Ford, then I could forgive Bob Morris too. And today, on this day, I no more have anything in my heart for what he did.
The education system has to be very fluid and dynamic because we're living in very different and changing times.
Treating all your citizens equally, all your citizens fairly, recognizing each group, not discriminating against one or the other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the November 3rd edition of the Bubb Report. Quickly, how the year is running away from us. This is, of course, the first edition for November, and I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. If you're joining us on Facebook, please do us a favor by sharing this week's live stream. And for those of you over at YouTube, do us a favor by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Your engagement with our YouTube page causes us to grow and reach an even wider audience. Of course, you can catch repeat episodes of the Bubb Report on WPG-10 television in Grenada, as well as on GBN television later this week. Of course, for those of you in North America, we have experienced fallback. What does that mean? It means that the Bubb Report will be streamed at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, while it will remain in the 10 a.m. hour in the Eastern Caribbean. So for those of you in North America who usually watch the Bubb Report at 10 o'clock, you would have to get up earlier to do so now at 9 a.m. But for the folks in Grenada, of course, the Bubb Report will remain in the usual 10 o'clock time slot. And now let's get to this week's editorial. Now, over in Havana, Cuba, the isolating effects of the United States embargo are impossible to ignore. Cuba's electrical grid collapsed again last week, the fourth such failure in the last 2 months, raising fresh doubts about a quick fix on an island already suffering from severe shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. Even the internet is a zone of isolation. The United States embargo means that Cubans cannot access Zoom, Skype, or Microsoft Teams, or to communicate with the outside world using any American-made technology. In short, the U.S. embargo impacts every aspect of life in Cuba, and that is precisely the point. 62 years ago, former Democratic President John Fitzgerald Kennedy introduced Proclamation 3447, an embargo on all trade with Cuba, designed to isolate Cuba and to stop the spread of so-called Sino-Soviet communism. Kennedy's Assistant Secretary of State, Lester Melroy, said, quote, "Every possible means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba." The goal of the Kennedy administration at the time was clear, quote, "to bring about hunger, desperation, and an overthrow of the Cuban government," unquote. Today, President Joe Biden, another Democratic president, lives up to Kennedy's legacy and the ambitions of his Cuban embargo. Not only has this current president refused to undo the extraordinary sanctions imposed by his predecessor, Donald Trump, that is his Republican predecessor, Donald Trump, he is also reneging on a campaign promise that he made to restore diplomatic relations with Cuba, but instead left the island on a list of state sponsors of terrorism. Yes, the United States has left Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. The Biden administration has also doubled down on the embargo, tightening restrictions and imposing a host of new sanctions against the Cuban government. Both the Biden administration and its Republican opposition claim that these measures are targeted at the regime rather than at the Cuban people. But the evidence to the contrary is not only anecdotal. The United Nations estimates that the Cuban embargo has cost Cuba over $133 billion in damages, costs that are compounded by the penalties imposed by the United States Office of Foreign Assets Control on Cuba's allies and investors. Between April 2019 and March 2020 alone, the Office of Foreign Assets and Control penalties amounted to over $2.4 billion, targeting banks, insurance companies, energy companies, and travel agencies alike. The effort of the embargo is therefore both local and global. It cripples the Cuban economy and undermines the multilateral system that the United States claims to lead. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization reports that the embargo has had a direct impact on its operations in Cuba, citing costs, losses, and damages that have resulted in drastic reductions of agricultural output on the island, despite the fact that the FAO is officially exempted from the embargo. The United Nations Development Program cites its own challenges in the implementation of projects like the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in Cuba. In particular, when Toyota Gibraltar Stock Holdings was forced to cancel the supply of vehicles to the UNDP office as a result of tightened US restrictions in 2018. And of course, the United Nations Environmental Program highlights several ways in which the embargo not only affects the Caribbean country, but also the sub-region and the United States itself. Now, these are all examples of the direct impact this embargo is having on the Cuban people. Now, critics of the embargo often rely on moral claims to make their case. It is no doubt a strong case. By its own admission, the United States aims to starve the island of Cuba, and its succeeding administrations have done so. And so what will the Kamala Harris administration do against the backdrop of this current Cuban embargo? Now, in the past, she has called for the end of the embargo, but of course, that has not happened in this particular administration in which she's vice president. The Bubb Report will therefore be watching the space to determine whether or not the Harris administration will continue this legacy of a Cuban embargo that is, quite frankly, in many respects, very hypocritical if, in fact, she wins the next election. Viewers and listeners, please stand by as we will return with our first guest for this week's program, the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Public Administration, Mrs. Lyndonna Hillaire Marshall. Please stand by. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. If you are just joining us, please remember to share this week's live stream. Of course, we will be joined later by the Prime Minister of Grenada, the Honorable Dickon Mitchell, who will be making an appearance here on the Bubb Report. Now, for our first guest, we are joined, as I said, by Mrs. Lyndonna Hillaire Marshall, the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Public Administration. Over the last 6 months, the government has articulated the need to create a new pension scheme for the close to 3,000 contract employees in the public service. According to the administration, the new pension scheme for contracted public officers will be one in which each contracted employee and government makes a contribution. On the other hand, unions representing public sector employees that are in contract indicated that they were not extensively consulted on the scope of this new scheme. Now, here to make sense of the timeline of the pension implementation and how it reconciles with the timeline for the regularization of contract employees in the public service is Permanent Secretary Mrs. Lyndonna Hillaire Marshall. Permanent Secretary, good morning and welcome to you.
Blessed morning to you, Dr. Bubb, and pleasant good morning to all our listeners and viewers, wherever you are this morning. Blessings to you.
Yes, absolutely. It's good to have you back again. Of course, you were here last year in which we were having a conversation on regularization following the press conference in which you announced that regularization timeline. So it's good to have you back again. Now, Mrs. Marshall, I do want to respect your time here, but let us begin by talking about the phased regularization approach that the DPA has embarked on with respect to the contract employees in the service. Now, the first phase should have ended in December of last year. That looked at persons in acting, temporary, on assignment, and probation status. Whereas the second phase, according to the press conference that you hosted, should be ending soon for workers holding PSC contracts, contracts of service, daily paid, and persons holding ministry letters. Now, the question is, if these workers are to be regularized into the established public service, why is there a need for them to still be mandated to contribute to this new pension scheme that is being rolled out?
Okay, good morning again. And I
Yes.
we did not say that the workers would be regularized in the established public service. So often, every time we get the opportunity to speak about regularization, we like to start off by articulating what is regularization, because it seems oftentimes people tend to misunderstand what we mean by the term regularization. And when we speak about what it is, we often say what it's not before we say what it is. So for us, regularization is not about us wholesale picking up every unestablished worker and placing them onto the establishment. We always try to get that clear. For us, regularization is about correcting the anomalies that exist between the unestablished and the established workers in the public service. So as we recognize people who are in the establishment, they enjoy a different set of benefits from that of those who are on the unestablishment. So the idea of the regularization is to review all of those anomalies and to correct those anomalies. The key thing for most people on the unestablished side is the fact that they pay equity. There's no pay, some receive more, some receive less. There is issues with the qualification for pension. That's a big one. And we know that there's also issues with their job security. So the establishment in the public service, we know it is that which speaks to the number of people who are employed by the Public Service Commission to meet the mandate and the scope of work for every ministry. So the ministries do have articulated functions, responsibility, core responsibilities that they have to carry out. And we know with time, things changes. And so we would have to make such adjustments, and we may have the need to create new positions on the establishment. But we also know the nature of public service is that we do have a lot of projects, we have a lot of programs, and so we have the need for an unestablished staff because this part of the work is fluid. And while they are unestablished, it doesn't mean that they have to be unpermanent, not permanent, in that they don't have to have security of tenure. So this is what we're seeking to
In
address.
other words, this term that is called non-employee, I believe that's a term.
Well, non-employee is that
a different thing?
A loose word that's been used simply to refer to people who are holding contracts for service, because these people are deemed independent contractors, and so the NIS wasn't paid for them. They did not receive a lot of the other things, which is a different, it's a mode of engagement. So what we're saying is that it's not about us wholesale picking up the close to 4,000 people who are unestablished and placing them onto the establishment. Okay? Because we understand the difference with the establishment and the unestablishment with regards to pension. Those on the establishment qualifies for the current defined benefit pension, whereas those who are on the unestablished side do not qualify for that pension. And this is where we say we need to correct that anomaly. But there's a lot of considerations. And when we looked at the factors and the options that we have, we decided it was best for us to advise the government to create a new pension that would allow for contributions, because the current one in its current construct, which is non-funded, non-contributory, it is really hard for the government to maintain such a structured pension for a swell of public officers.
Because, of course, the actuarial reports would say that is just not sustainable.
It is not sustainable.
Yes. Now let us talk about the formula, the contributory formula that the government has proposed. Now, on what basis did you determine the 3% below the NIS wage ceiling and the 6% above the NIS wage ceiling?
Okay, so I am not the actuary scientist. We did have the privilege to procure the expertise of an actuary scientist who did the permutations and the modeling with the, the mathematical, whatever had to go into that. So
Correct.
The intention was for us to allow for our officers on the exit to leave with between 75 to 85% replacement rate of their salaries. So that is the aim. So he did the modeling and the permutations to get us to that point, and the percentage rate that was decided that would allow for officers to retire at between 75 to 85% replacement rate is 3% below and 6% above NIS ceiling.
Okay, very well. Now, Ms. Marshall, of course, the unions in their appearance on the Bubb Report expressed concerns about their involvement in the new contributory pensions process. Sorry, I got a tongue twister there almost. Their argument is that each union represents a different subset of workers in the system who are holding different contracts. So why not consult specifically with the unions that represent these specific subset of workers, as opposed to just sending a blanket correspondence to the Grenada Trades Union Council, inviting them to the table? Further to that, the unions also argue that the consultative process appears to them, at least, to have been just a box-checking exercise, that you've already decided on the scope of the contractual pension scheme, and that their presence there perhaps was just as a matter for you to communicate what your intentions were. In other words, to what extent have the consultations that you've conducted as well, because you've done public consultations on this issue as well, how much of public input did you take before making that final determination of what the pension formula would look like for this particular subset of workers?
Well, you're speaking about two different things. The formula,
yes,
it was not influenced too heavily from the consultations. The formula, as I said, was more of an actual scientist sort of engagement, because the intention was for us to get to a 75 to 85% replacement rate. However, the main features of the plan was heavily influenced by the consultations. Almost every feature, when we walk through the feature, you would see most of it was as a result of what we heard coming from the consultations that was held. So, I mean, in terms of the need for the past service credit, for example, when we spoke with our public officers, that was something that was heavily articulated. The concerns were, I've been working for the past 15, 16, sometimes 20 years. And what would happen to my years of service? And we've heard that, and we said we need to factor in that somewhere into this plan. We also heard people who are over age 45, 50, and it's like, you're not coming to introduce a new plan? How is that going to affect me? And all of those things we took into consideration. So a lot of the features of the plan, and we even heard people speak to the fact that I don't want to stay, I may not want to stay in the public service for 30 years like some of you folks. How are you going to make provisions for me if I decide to move from the public service to the private sector of, and that too, we heard and we factored in that into the plan as well. So most of the features of the plan was heavily influenced by the consultations that were held. So I cannot agree to the notion that the plan was developed outside of consultation and it was just talked down to. It wasn't at all.
So in essence, the consultation was not a box-checking exercise.
No, I would not say that at all. To me, the consultations were very rich. We heard quite a lot, and from us on the committee, we could not have think of everything. And most of the things we heard, we like, oh yes, that is something that we probably definitely need to consider. And we were able to walk it through and share it with the experts, and we were able to build it into the plan. Remember, the features of the plan, most so are policy, right? So we needed to have all of that agreed to, and we were happy when we tabled it at the cabinet level, they were able to agree with most of what we said, and we now have what we present today as the pension plan.
Now, I am aware that the union also sent correspondence to you, which, according to the union, you belatedly responded to the correspondence. Now, talk about what were your expectations in respect of the terms of reference of the union's participation in that particular consultation and discussion on this particular pension issue? Because I suspect that, of course, we have the other overarching pension issue that needs to be treated with at a legislative and at a constitutional level for the more established workers, especially around the whole idea of the contributory versus non-contributory pension. That's different from what this is. So what were your expectations in respect of the union's participation there? Because it would appear as if the unions had a different understanding. In other words, that they felt as if they ought to have been in a position of negotiation on behalf of the employees, as opposed to just consultations on what the framework of the pension should look like.
Well, I mean, what would prevent a negotiation as opposed to a consultation? It really depends on how the conversation progresses. Because with a negotiation, you share your thing, I share mine, we give up some here and we give up some there, and we agree on something. And I don't think we prevented that sort of type of discussion, because most of the points that were articulated in any of the discussions with the union, if it's not deemed a negotiation, it was open to hear what their take is in light of what we are sharing. And we were open to hear what it is they are concerned about, so that we can factor in that too into this design and final outlook of what the plan would look like. I mean, I would think the union, as we understood from day one, is a key stakeholder in all of this. And so we thought they would have loved to be part of the sit down to shape what the new plan is all about. So I couldn't see why they would not have a representative on the committee. I am not in a position to speak to their reasoning behind the scene in terms of why they chose not to be, or why they are not. I can't say chose, they are not. The fact is, When we look at the construct of the committee, there is no union representative. The cabinet did make provision for it. The invitation went out. And today, when we look at the construct of the committee, there is no union representative. Okay, so whatever is the decisions or the reasoning, the rationale behind it, I mean, that might be their own internal, whatever they need to do to massage that. But I would think that the union would have seen this as a critical interest point for them, and they would have wanted to sit at the table so that they can have their concerns, their view heard directly, so that it can shape what the outcome of the plan look like. But it didn't prevent them from doing that, because we did have conversation with them, and some of the things that we've heard, we also took on board as well.
And you said some of the things that you heard you also took from board from the union. Can you articulate what those were?
No, so from one of the things I remember, and from our last discussion with the union, I was told that we took it wrong. One of the things, for example, that we took on board, that we deduced from the conversation with the union, was the fact that they wanted us to leave the ex gratia intact in terms of not affecting them. So we thought, okay, let's see how we can include that. And we say, okay, we're going to present that as a consideration, so that the people who qualify for the ex gratia, if their thinking is it is better for them to stay on the ex gratia, let them stay on the ex gratia. And if they think that it is better for them to migrate to the new plan, let them migrate to the new plan. So we left that option. No, we heard from the union last discussion that they did not want that at all. So that's okay. Good thing is we said it was an option. So if that is the case, then the option is still there. If the ex gratia people would prefer to stay on the ex gratia or migrate to the new plan, because the ex gratia does exist for people who serve 15 years and are age 50 in public service on the exit. That's the people who are holding ministry letters.
Okay, very well. Now, Ms. Marshall, let us segue into the statutorization of the General Hospital. I suspect personnel changes may be or may not be under your bailiwick, but I know that you speak specifically to pension issues. But we are aware that many hospital employees are also contract for service employees. Statutorization does require the secondment of public officers. Of course, sections 28 to 33 of the Hospital Authorities Act, I believe it's called, speaks to how workers are to be treated under the statutorization statute. Now, what can hospital employees expect in advance of this change specific to this current pension scheme that is being implemented, and specific to what their tenure of employment would look like on the issues of contracts of service and things like that? Because, of course, with statutorization comes a secondment to whatever body that will be created as the governance structure for this statutory body.
Okay, so I as you rightfully mentioned, I am not in a position to speak too much about the statutorization of the hospital, but in terms of following the procedures, there are articulated procedures to follow in terms of moving people who are on the establishment over to a statutory body. And we've already established that we do have two different sets of people on the establishment and people who are not. So we will have to treat with them differently. So the people who are on the establishment, we follow the protocol, we follow the procedures that exist. In terms of the people who are on the unestablished side and the concern about their pension, the good thing is the new pension plan is designed to accommodate multiple employers, as we articulated earlier. So the statutory bodies are also eligible to participate in the new pension. So I don't see it affecting them in terms of their benefits in light of the new pension if they have to move over to a statutory body, because the new pension will be able to accommodate them. And the good thing too is that they would not lose their years, because the main feature of the plan is that we are going to honor the past service credit for all our workers. So.
All of that past service credit there. Yes, that always, I do remember, because my grandmother of blessed memory worked at the General Post Office at the time. And when the post office was being statutorized, There were a lot of anxieties there about, security of tenure, her contract, and what all of that would look like. But Mrs. Marshall, I do want to go back to the public sector pension plan, because I do have it here, and I had the opportunity to look at the whole vesting that it talks about. And so if I may, I'm going to share the screen here, and I want you to talk about what that process would look like financially, that is, for the employee. So let me pull that up here so we can both see that screen. Let me see. All right, we're both seeing the screen here. Yes, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, okay,
now,
you're talking about the vesting period.
Correct. The vesting, yes. Can you, in layman's terms, break that down for a citizen who is looking at this, or for perhaps an employee who might say that, you know what, I want to enter into a contractual arrangement with the public service of Grenada for, let's say, a period of 5 or 10 years, and then take my public sector information, my public sector pay, right, or retirement contributions, shall we say, pension contributions into the private sector. Talk about how that vesting would work in that context, please.
Okay. So we say participants in the plan will be fully vested after 5 years. Mm-hmm. Fully vested meaning you will have all the funds contributed on your behalf by the government attributed to your account fully, only after 5 years. So if you serve below 5 years, all of what government contributes on your behalf will not be fully vested, will not be attributed to you if you decide to leave the public service before the vested period. So, for example, if you decide to leave at the 1 year of service, after 1 year of service, whatever funds the government contributed on your behalf is not going to be available to you on your exit. All that you would have locked into the plan would be what you contributed. If you decide to leave after 2 years of service, whatever you contributed to the plan is locked in for you. However, only 20% of what the government contributed on your behalf will be locked in for you on your retirement. If you leave after 3 years, only 40% of what the government contributed for you on your behalf will be locked in for you on your retirement. And so it goes on up to 5 years when we say it's fully vested, when you would be able to lock in your full 100% contribution on government's behalf, what government contributed towards for you. So you can move that to another pension plan if you're moving and there is a pension plan in place on the other side where you're going, you can move with that contribution. You don't have to lose it. So we're saying if you did not give us a maximum of 5 years, government's contribution will not be locked in for you 100%. It will not.
Okay, it would be prorated. Now, past service credit here, that initial lump sum that is credited to your account. How is that formula? Because when you say past service here, is that formula determined? Say, okay, past service for five years past service. Is there going to be a particular formula based on the years of service? How would that look? What would that look like?
Yeah, so to make it, first, not to be too complicated too much, what we've decided to do is to use your current salary. So, in the past, if somebody would have been with us probably for 20 years, they may have started at X, and unfortunately, some people hardly moved, but they started at X, and today they're at Y. So instead of us having to go back and calculate what it would have been like in 2022, in 2008, we're going to just use your current salary to calculate the past service credit. So we're going to go back to your first engagement with the public service. So if your first engagement was 2008, we would calculate all what government would have contributed on your behalf from 2008 to present, and half of that would be credited to your account. So nobody starts off at zero.
Okay, right. So you have some credit happening here. And of course, the retirement, of course, we know that in the context of Grenada, owing to some of the population and social security challenges of the state, that the retirement age is something that, is a conversation that has been had, as well as the survivability of the country's social security scheme. Yes? So what would that look like? What would that pension scheme look like for retirement? Because we have both the normal retirement age and the early retirement age. It makes two distinctions here.
Yeah. The normal retirement age would be the age that is policy for the institution. And we say that because we are encouraging the statutory bodies to be part of this program as well. We do have some statutory bodies whose retirement age is 65 and some who are 60. But for us in the public service, it is 60. So the normal retirement age would be age 60 for people who are public officers. We do have provisions for early retirement because some people, I think the plan's early retirement age is age 50 or 55, if I'm not mistaken. Is that a 50 or 55 retirement? Where you'll be able to get your benefits at that
so
age.
50 or 55, you get those benefits. And of course, full benefits at the normal retirement age.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
But in this case, it would be based on what your contributions are. It's really not about age. The age does not go into a formula as it does for the defined benefits contribution. The defined benefit pension now, age is a key feature of the calculations formula. But for this one, it is not, because it's all about your contribution and at the age.
Right. Now, legislatively, what would this look like? Because I suspect in order for this to be implemented, of course, there were several rolling timelines. And I do not want to say that Hurricane Beryl affected this, because at this point that might be sounding like a cliche in many areas. But the initial timeline ought to have been October, or should have been October. Is there a reason why we now have a different timeline for implementation at the legislative level in Parliament?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things do happen. We always set ourselves targets, and we love a challenge, so we always challenge ourselves at tighter deadlines. But with things happening, sometimes we really don't get to meet the targets that we set. So we are continuing to work with getting the legislation side of things finalized. I mean, before we sent the plan over to the legal side, we decided to do another round of consultations. And I think that kind of delayed us a bit, because we really wanted to hear more after we've signed the plan. We went back out to the public. We went back out to different groups to hear what their thoughts are on the finished version of the plan, just in case we wanted to make, final adjustments before sending it off to the legal part for them to draft the bill. And I know that kind of, caused a bit of a delay. So we weren't able to get it to the legal affairs in time so that they can do the drafting of the bill. But we've since gotten to that point. And so we would wait on the process to get it through to passing before we can pronounce a date for the actual implementation of the new bill, the new plan.
Okay, so you've gotten that information back from legal affairs.
The first draft was done.
The first draft,
draft. And now we are looking at the second draft.
You're looking at the second draft, and what is the timeline for that?
Well, we hope to send it back to legal affairs on Monday, God's willing.
On Monday, okay. And of course, once you get that back, once you get final sign off from them, I suspect then you will proceed. The policymakers, that is now, will take that to Parliament.
Right.
And we might be looking at a 2025, the new fiscal year implementation 2025. Knock on wood, all things considered.
Yes. If it's before, that's fine too. I mean, the soonest time, because I think we're hearing the cry from the workers that the sooner the better for them. Because when they really calculate this, it's really about getting an additional 3% towards their benefits. So the sooner for them, it's better. So we wouldn't want to delay it anyway. If we could avoid it, we would avoid it.
Now, and I'm glad you brought up the workers here, because of course the union represent the workers, but the workers, I'm sure, were consulted on this by way of internal meetings that were held in the ministries.
Yes. We've had numerous discussions with our members, our workers.
And what were some of the concerns? You said the tone you're striking here seems to be an enthusiastic tone on the part of the workers.
That's what we're getting from the discussions that we've been having. Most of them are excited about it and looking forward to at least getting something started. Initially, we've heard there was some skepticism in terms of the years, as we mentioned. They were concerned about, we bring in this new plan, what would be done with the years of service past. So now that they understand that consideration has been given to the past service credits, a lot of them feel a little bit more at ease, and they are now looking forward to the implementation of the plan.
But in respect of that financial literacy piece, Mrs. Marshall, because I think that is another issue that not only, and I confess that in my particular job as well, I needed to go on a financial literacy journey to understand my own pension and retirement plan. In the US, it's the 403B, which I'm enrolled under, specific to the financial education piece. That to me is one of the critical elements of wanting to sign on to any kind of pension plan, whether that's in Grenada or anywhere else, quite frankly. So what are you doing as a committee, as a ministry, as a DPA to ensure that there is that financial education piece? Because I think without it, you would find a lot of anxiety on the part of the workers, especially having concerns to, okay, well, you guys are already taking out money for NIS from my paycheck. Now you're taking out money for this other thing, right?
I don't think we can discount that. And that has always been part of our line of sight. There is need for financial literacy. And if you look at the function of the board, it's also enshrined in there as well, because this is something that cannot be one-off. It has to be continuous. So the education, financial literacy for the members is something that's going to be ongoing annually. So people would be aware of the options, what they need to consider, how they should operate. So all of these things would be continuously done so that everybody is comfortable with the decisions that they make with regards to this new pension plan.
And then, of course, finally, we have the timeline here, and I'm going back to the pension plan document that was based on, of course, that's what the actuary presented at the many consultations you had that I had an opportunity to listen to in preparation for today's program, as well as for conversations I had with the unions. You finalizing the bill, which you just spoke about, procuring an administrator and an investment manager. Can you talk about what that looks like, and who would that be? An external party that would be doing that work? Would be administering that, and why not under the Ministry of Finance?
No, it was, and that too was another point we got from the consultations. We've heard it loud and clear articulated that people felt it would be more secured to have reputable pension administrators serve as the administrator for the plan. So while it would be a little bit more costly, they tend to believe that it would be more secured and a little bit more, for want of a better word, prudent to have a reputable administrator.
Some might say, Madam Permanent Secretary, some might say efficient, given that it's a private sector entity.
Efficient, because we do have efficient public service entities.
Correct. I'm saying that in jest, but that's what some might say.
Yes, but we've heard that concern articulated, and we said, you know what, we don't think that we have the skill set now, and even the focused ministry or department to handle this. And so we've heard the call, and we've asked that we consider outsourcing the administration and investment management of the plan. So we are now finalizing the RFP so that we can review the proposals to make a determination as to which of these entities with the best track record will better be placed to manage the plan.
Do you have an initial sense of what administrator you might want to target?
It might be best if we get someone that can do both instead of having to procure a separate administrator and a separate investment manager. We're trusting that we would be able to get a company that has experience and evidence of good, track record doing both.
Right. Okay. And would that company, would you want to focus more on financial companies, investment companies in the Caribbean, or would you be looking beyond the scope of CARICOM?
We will open it up, but I guess it really would depend on what we agree on the scope and the criteria for the RFP, but it will be opened.
It will be an open process there, and I suspect whichever bid is most attractive, whichever proposal is most attractive that meets the criteria that you require. And then, of course, communication with statutory bodies. I suspect that has happened, as well as communication with potential members. Potential members here meaning those who would be the beneficiaries of this pension scheme?
The public officers who are affected. So that's mostly our unestablished staff. Yes. And even the staff at the statutory bodies, we've had engagement with them as well.
Okay.
So that they to understand what the plan is about.
Would statutory body employees be mandated to also serve, contribute to the scheme, or no?
So what we've
if
done,
not, why not?
What we said is that the initial decision to be part of the plan on an organization level is not mandatory. That's voluntary. So every statutory body now has the opportunity to choose to be part of the plan or not, based on what they already have in place. But once you made the decision to be part of the plan, all your staff members will be mandated to be part of the plan.
Okay, very well. All right. And calculating past service, we already discussed this. What does registration mean here?
Right. So the registration would mean we already designed the form. So every participant will have to complete, there will be need for you to articulate your beneficiary and all those sort of registration data that we would need to collate to form that person account. We would have to collect that so that we can have those in place.
Okay, very well. All right, Mrs. Marshall, I think I've exhausted, again, questions specific going down into the weeds with respect to what's in the plan. That is also, and I do know that you appeared on several other media platforms, so I suspect you're probably seeing this as a repetitive, but what we try to do on this program is to look at everything that has been articulated before and try to ask a lot of follow-up questions and try to do a lot of more deep dives into the specifics of issues. So that's why we felt it was important to have you here. But Mrs. Marshall, let us talk about the bigger, what I consider to be perhaps the bigger elephant in the room. And that has to do with the overall non-contributory pension elephant that government has to consider. Yes? Now, how much of this particular contributory pension scheme do you think can be used as a linchpin, as a jump-off point for determining what a future contributory pension scheme can look like for the more established public workers in the system who are now a part of this non-contributory pension? So in other words, how much of this would be grandfathered into whatever new pension scheme would inform or would be informed for the public, the established workers in the service?
Well, I mean, given what we understand,
yes,
based on the current construct of this defined benefit pension plan that we now have to work with, I think when the decision was taken since 1983 to repeal the pension and introduce the NIS, it was simply because since then we understood that if we keep putting towards something and not having anything in return, it is just not sustainable. So we understood then that the current construct of the pension is not sustainable, particularly because it is going towards a non-productive sector. I mean, our retirees no longer contribute to the production of the economy. So it would be best if the entire pension for the public service is contributory. But when the consideration was being given to that, there are some constitutional technicalities that I am not a lawyer, so I cannot fully articulate what they are, but we had to adhere to the advice given that it was something that we could not have interfered with at this time. So if later down the road, the issues that need to be ironed out can be ironed out, and further consideration can be given to making additional adjustment to allow for everybody to contribute to the pension plan, then I'm sure this is what would happen. Because I think everybody appreciates the fact that any pension plan that is non-contributory and non-funded, it's not sustainable.
And previous governments have articulated so as well. But let us talk about I lost my train of thought there for a second. The pension committee that was established to look into that bigger behemoth that would require particular constitutional changes and things like that. Has that committee submitted its recommendations? Have they completed their work? Because I do understand that you also sat on that committee. So what is that looking like? Or do they still have further work to do in respect of the established workers and that whole issue of the non-contributory pension?
No. So as I mentioned, the initial conversation started off looking at the entire ambit of the pension plan with a view to see if it was possible for everybody to contribute. But early up, we understood that the current pension, there's some constitutional issues that we couldn't address. So the committee's work was more or less under the parameters of the new pension plan. So I would presume going forward, if the conversation is going to be extended, a new committee would be constituted to look into the possibility of reforming the current pension.
Okay, very well. So there would be a new committee to look at that.
I can't say that might be the case.
That might be the case. Okay,
yes,
all right. Again, you caveat it. You are caveating here with the word might. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, because I can't decide that.
Of course, you are not a policymaker. That's for the policymakers to decide. Now, what about the role of GAFIN in all of this? That is I believe it's the financial agency that regulates both the statutory bodies, statutory financial institutions, as well as financial institutions and insurance. What role did they play in all of this?
Well, we did have conversations with them as well as we did with the other entities to get their view on what are some of the features we shared with what we were thinking, and we did get some conversation going with them. They were part of the statutory bodies discussion. They did sit with that as well. So we did get some.
Because their role is about regulation. So I'm trying to understand in the context of this particular pension plan, what will be their overall supervisory role in all of this? Or will they have a supervisory role in determining, for example, or assessing, for example, the quality of the administrators who might be coming in to administrate that pension plan? Yes. What is their overall regulatory function here?
Yeah, and even the investment management. I think it has to do along that lines. But we need that would be articulated in the bill. So based on what the bill speaks to with regards to this overarching supervisory management role,
yes,
this is what would pertain to the plan.
And that will be in the legislation. Okay, very well. Mrs. Marshall, thank you so very much for appearing on the Bubb Report this week. Is there anything else that
welcome. Always happy.
Is there any? always a pleasure. Is there anything else that we did not talk about that you want to articulate?
Not necessarily. I mean, I just continue to thank everybody who contributed one way or the other to the shaping of this new pension plan. I firmly believe the anomalies in the public service that exist between the unestablished and the established staff really need to be corrected. And I'm happy that we are taking steps to address these anomalies. And the introduction of a new pension plan is a significant part of correcting those anomalies. So we are looking forward to the day when all our public officers can feel comfortable to know that at the end of their service to the government of Grenada and people of Grenada, they can receive a retirement benefit. So I'm grateful to be and honored to be part of this initiative, and I look forward to the successful completion of it. I'm trusting that everybody will put their hands and minds and thoughts and ideas together to ensure its success. And again, I thank you for the opportunity always to speak to any of the matters that we are leading from the point of the Department of Public Administration.
Yeah. Efficiency is another thing that we have to talk about in another forum, because I jumped at how you discussed efficiency in the public service, and that is an issue I believe that needs further interrogation. But Mrs. Marshall, thank you for appearing on the Bubb Report this week.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, this is the Bubb Report. I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. Please stay tuned for the second segment of the program, where we will be joined by Grenada's Prime Minister, the Honorable Dickon Mitchell. Of course, the Prime Minister traditionally has appeared on the program at the occasion of the one-year celebration of his party's victory at the polls 2.5 years ago. But of course, he's joining us now, as there are many issues that needs to be articulated in the wake of Hurricane Beryl. So please stand by for that conversation, and we will be right back after this quick word from our sponsors. Please stand by.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
Sunday, live on the Bubb Report.
Why don't you say cannabis or weed or marijuana?
Because historically,
why are you being politically correct about that?
It's Grenadian Prime Minister, the Honorable Dickon Mitchell, sits with Dr. Kellen Bubb for a no-holds-barred, in-depth interview.
Well, no, I would press you there. I mean, you can't tell private enterprise how they should advertise their products. That would be the pushback. I mean, but
but let me say this, Kellen.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not saying to legislate.
We'll unpack, dissect, expand, and elaborate on the NDC's transformational thrust like no other journalist can.
Well, first, I don't think so, Miss, you with your promise.
that the incumbent is proposing to pay public servants.
So I am only parroting what they proposed. And you were my former history teacher at the presentation called.
And I would say you're a pretty good student of history.
Join us as we analyze transformation.
We subject ourselves to scrutiny, and we've never held public office. But those who've held public office for 38 years cannot go on the Kellon Bob show.
And viewers and listeners, we welcome you back to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Now, Prime Minister the Honorable Dickon Mitchell of Grenada has recently taken to the various local media platforms to sell his government's performance on the heels of the devastating Hurricane Beryl that impacted the northern flank of the state of Grenada. In these conversations, the Prime Minister sought to defend his administration's stewardship of the national economy, as well as to grade his ministers on a curve. The administration, which is going into their mid-year of governance, insists that they are effectively managing the affairs of the state, while not losing track of the transformational agenda that catapulted his administration into a long-shot victory in the last election. Now, since the Prime Minister's last appearance on the Bubb Report, several issues have emerged that require the type of interrogation that only this platform has been proven to do. Our conversation with the Honorable Dickon Mitchell today will focus on the following areas: prime ministerial travel and integrity in public life, the potential reset on Grenada's hydrocarbon potential, the CBI program and fiscal management, health and wellness, and of course, we will end today's conversation by talking about the administration's 2025 legislative agenda and the current state of the National Democratic Congress in its management of the party. We're happy now to be joined by the Honorable Dickon Mitchell, Prime Minister of Grenada. Prime Minister Mitchell, welcome back to the Bubb Report, sir. You're becoming a regular feature on the program. Just unmute the mic, sir. Just unmute the mic.
Thank you, and good morning to you and to your listeners, and thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Prime Minister, let us begin by, we want to get straight into it because I want to respect your time. It's a busy weekend for you. And of course, today is your party's General Council as well. So let's see if you will be reading any riot acts there. We don't know, but we'll see, right? But let us begin by interrogating prime ministerial travel, sir, and integrity in public life. Now, had it not been for a question posed by a local journalist about your trip to Nigeria, the National Community Prime Minister might not have been aware of the true scope of the significance of that trip to the motherland, or that you appointed a chief of staff in the person of former magistrate Mr. Teddy St. Louis. Now, I'm using this anecdote, Prime Minister, to ask about your foreign trips, which you have attempted to justify on the Grenada Broadcasting Network. But the issue here is not so much about the foreign trips as it is about the size of the parties that travel with you, as well as a lack of voluntary accounting of the benefits of those trips to the national community. At least that is what the opposition has articulated, that you go on these trips, but when you return from these trips, that there is not a proper accounting as to the specific benefits or investment opportunities or other benefits that emerge from those travels. What say you, sir?
Well, I think we should be specific and not generalized. So I'll start with from July 1. Maybe that's a good opportunity since it's the last half of the year and we can take from on July 1. Let me go back a little. On the 30th of June, I traveled to Barbados for the Cricket World Cup. As you're aware, this event was being hosted by the Caribbean, the United States, and it's an international event. Cricket, obviously, I don't think I need to say the significant role that cricket plays in.
Your father plays cricket as well.
Yes, that event actually was a CARICOM event hosted by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and it involved a number of the Caribbean leaders who were there: the President of Guyana, the Prime Minister of Antigua, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, etc. Coincidentally, the leader of His Majesty's opposition was also at the event. I would have traveled back to Grenada. We would have had Hurricane Beryl. Save for traveling to the Grenadian Islands to provide support to our colleague, Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves, I would not have traveled for the month of July and August, save for one other trip at all. So let's be clear, for July and August, I did not leave the state of Grenada except for visiting the Grenadian Islands and except for a solitary trip to Guyana. And this was a trade mission to Guyana, first of all, to express our solidarity and appreciation and gratitude for the tremendous support provided by the President of Guyana, the government and people of Guyana, the Guyana Defense Force, the private sector, who played a significant role in supporting Grenada in the aftermath of Hurricane Beryl. We also traveled to Guyana as part of a trade mission. We are seeking to, and coming out of that meeting and that trade mission, we will have direct flights between Guyana and Grenada starting in December. So when we talk about what are the benefits of travel, I don't think there's anything that's more self-explanatory than that. A large contingent of Grenadian businessmen and women from all sectors, including agro-processing and small manufacturers, visited Guyana at that time. And I can tell you for sure that many of them who've had challenges as to potential markets and so on, see Guyana as an opportune, thriving, growing market to sell their products. I could give you one specific instance of a Grenadian small manufacturer who makes wipes and has had significant logistical difficulties in getting the wipes to Guyana. In fact, they go to Miami and then to Guyana. And coming out of the trip, I've been able to put her in contact with the head of the Guyana private sector grouping, which has actually helped her in solving some of these logistical issues so that she can in fact get the wipes taken directly to Guyana. So you have to understand that in many of these instances, it is not necessarily for me to come and boast or talk about those issues, but the small manufacturers and other business persons who benefit from such engagements will tell you. The Guyanese Grenadian diaspora who's here, who has to spend a large period of time in Trinidad to get to Guyana, or vice versa, will also tell you what the significant benefits that a direct flight between Guyana and Grenada will bring. We need to understand something. There is a significant expat community growing and developing in Guyana right now because of the hydrocarbon growth in that industry in Guyana. They want to visit the rest of the Caribbean. They are right now going to Barbados and the Dominican Republic. Grenada is much shorter, and therefore having a direct flight has the potential to give our hoteliers or taximen and affiliated tourist-related businesses a significant market that they can tap into, particularly in the off-season, to grow their business. That is the purpose of travel. And I can see that President Ali and I, when we met here in Grenada during the CARICOM summit with the Guyanese diaspora, that was the first question that was posed to both the president and myself. When will we see direct flights between Guyana and Grenada? And you have to appreciate, Grenada doesn't have an airline. Guyana doesn't have an airline really, except for the small planes that travel internally within Guyana. And so we have to partner with the private sector to get that done. And that requires the conversations, that requires the system, that requires the face-to-face, that requires understanding each other's sectors and so on. That's one of the reasons for traveling. So let's be clear. Save for a trip to Guyana and to the Grenadian Islands. I'm talking here, Mairo and so on, Union Island, which luckily we were able to go with the Grenadian Airlines or SVG Airlines. In July and August, I did not leave the state of Grenada. In September, I traveled to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and anyone who has been around any civilized country understands the importance of the General Assembly. And while in New York, I took the opportunity to go over to Washington to meet with the staff at our embassy in Washington. And so that the public understands, our official embassy to the United States is based in Washington, D.C. It is our embassy to the United States.
It was your first trip to Washington, D.C., and I know that the folks in the area were very happy to see you here. There was a huge turnout at the gala that they had. Well, it wasn't a gala. I don't want people to start saying there was a gala, but it was a reception.
A celebration of Grenada's 50th anniversary of independence. And I make this point to say that for 2.5 years, as the Prime Minister of Grenada, I haven't visited our embassy, main embassy, for not just the United States, but also the Organization of the American States. So when people talk about travel, there is no significant travel. So I have not even been to the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C. I have not visited prior to that trip or embassy in Washington, D.C., or staff or ambassador. I have not had the opportunity to even present credentials to the Organization of American States, a regional grouping of the highest esteem of which Grenada is a member. So you actually, if you're paying attention, you would recognize that what I sought to do, in fact, is to combine in a very intense and short period of travel, one trip to the United States that killed two birds with one stone, right? So we have to understand that. And then the other trip, which I took, or in a sense, it was it didn't work out exactly as planned. I had been invited to Rwanda by Secretary General of the African Free Trade Areas, Secretary General Wamkele Mene, to address a forum in Rwanda, which is seeking to promote significant business trade investments among Africa, among Africa and its diaspora. And for the record, I want to make a general point. This government's policy is that the Prime Minister and the ministers, as I've said, save for international and regional bodies, which we are part of and therefore have an obligation to attend the meetings, the conferences, and to partake actively in those institutions, such as the United Nations or the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States or CARICOM. All policies that if those who are inviting us to travel or to visit or to attend an event are not prepared and willing to pay for it or fund it, we don't travel. So the trip to Rwanda, all of the sourcing of that was complements the FRXIM and the Free Trade Secretariat from Rwanda. In fact, when I got to the UK and it became evident that we had the outbreak of the Marburg virus in Rwanda, and when I phoned Secretary General Wamkele Mene to indicate to him that because of the health concerns, that regrettably I would not attend, I actually offered to reimburse him because clearly reimburse the Secretariat because clearly they were paying for a trip, which I was now cancelling midway through, and he actually graciously turned it down. So the original schedule would have seen me traveling to Rwanda, and then from Rwanda traveling to Rwanda to Nigeria, and then from Nigeria back to Grenada. So in the United Kingdom, I had to make a decision as to whether I flew back home or whether I journeyed on to Nigeria. And frankly, the only way in which I was able to journey on to Rwanda is because Mr. Dangote graciously agreed to offer to fly me directly from the United Kingdom to Nigeria, because obviously you'd envisage that it was a ordinary commercial flight that would have expected to take me from Rwanda to Nigeria. So once I was no longer in Rwanda, there was no way I would be able to get to Nigeria, frankly, without flying from the UK to Nigeria. And again, in keeping with the mandate that I've said, if I'm invited, unless it is some organization that Grenada is obligated to, whoever's inviting me, my policies, they foot the bill because we do not
put the bill. Yeah, and I think that was not clear before, but now you're saying that a lot of that travel.
I will say this. I've repeated this statement repeatedly. I've said so in Parliament. I've said so generally that all ministers stay for what I've said to you, and that's a documented policy of the government of Grenada. I actually turn travel down if persons are not, if they're inviting me, not if I'm inviting myself.
Not you, okay. But in some cases, you have to invite yourself as the Prime Minister of the country in CARICOM and things like that.
So, for example, at the United Nations, if you choose not to come, it's a matter of you. And so, obviously, you have to fit the bill. And even in circumstances where we are obligated to do so, we also always look to see there are opportunities for donors and so on to help fund this travel. And I want to make the point because I think it's sad and silly, really, that it's come to stuff like this. My children traveled with me. With the intent, obviously, to go to Rwanda and the intent to then journey to Nigeria and back. And that was a bill footed entirely by myself, paid for by myself. So when people are frankly talking nonsense and talking without the facts, let me put it on record. This was a bill paid entirely by myself. It was not even paid by the persons who invited me because I wanted to make a point of indicating that my children has nothing to do with my public service. So let's fast forward now to concrete issues about the benefits of travel to Grenada. And I went in length and in detail about the
yes, Prime
with Guyana. But
yes.
I don't think I have to explain the benefits of going to the United Nations.
Well, no, of course, not CARICOM. I mean, that's not the issue here. The issue here was just the scope of travel as well as who accompanied you on those travels.
No, and I can, well, I've already addressed my
but you have already addressed it. You have already addressed it. So I don't think that there would be a need for us to exhaust that. Now, Prime Minister, however, while you were in Nigeria, the Dangote firm indicates, and you did not say that in the press conference, but it came out in news stories following publications in Nigeria that said that they wanted to import crude oil from Grenada. I mean, Prime Minister, Grenada does not export any, they wanted to import those petrochemical products for Grenada, but we don't export petrochemical products. So how did this conversation come about oil and gas? And are you in possession of new information with respect to Grenada's hydrocarbon resources that you've not revealed to the national community that perhaps you want to reveal now on the Bubb Report?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear that the Dangote Group did not. And if you watch the report, and you have to be careful about what newspaper people or news people say and what the company actually says. The Dangote Group itself did not, and I've not seen any publication by that group indicating that it was importing or seeking to import crude or any petrochemical products from Grenada to whether it's Nigeria, Africa, or elsewhere. So I want to make that very clear. The Dangote Group has not said that. And we actually held no such discussions. That's one. Two, I'm not in possession of any information that I'm able to disclose, whether here or to the public in general, that would suggest that Grenada is in a position right now to export any hydrocarbon-related products. So I certainly intend to provide to the nation before the end of the month a comprehensive update of the work that the technical working group led by former Finance Minister Nazim Burke has been doing. The cabinet appointed last year a technical working group led by former Finance Minister Mr. Burke. It comprises a former Accountant General and a former CEO of the Grenada Cooperative Bank, Mr. Richard Duncan, Mr. Rodney George, the Solicitor General, and Mr. Nurse, who's a very well-known Grenadian geologist who lives in Germany.
That's Raymond Nurse, I believe.
Yes.
Raymond Nurse, okay.
And or commonly known as Gallo. And they have been doing a lot of work because the starting point for us has been to make sure we have a complete understanding of the current state of all of the country's contractual and legal obligations. I have had one meeting with a representative of GPG since that time, and we have been engaged with GPG to try and understand and get a full picture of where we are. You recall in Parliament, I indicated that part of our concerns was ensuring that we had a complete file and a complete picture of so that we could understand that. The technical working group has since retained professional consultants, legal and technical, to provide further guidance to us. And so I will, by the end of November, provide the public with a comprehensive update on the work of the technical working group and where we are in relation to Grenada's hydrocarbon legal obligations, potential exploration, and any ancillary or additional matters related to it.
And Prime Minister, I'm glad you brought up GPG here, the meeting that you held with GPG, what was articulated in the throne speech that was last year in respect of the non-existence of files. Now, in the last week, Prime Minister, former Energy Minister Gregory Bowen said publicly that your administration lied essentially about not knowing the whereabouts of the oil and gas files. In fact, Bowen said that he met and communicated with you and your team on several occasions to assist with locating those documents. And that's quoting Bowen, he said, GPG also sent to you those documents. Now he's calling for an apology, Prime Minister, for what he says is putting his name into disrepute by claiming that there was no files, because that is now saying that has sullied his reputation. Now, will you begin by publicly apologizing to Mr. Bowen and explaining the contradiction between your statement and the non-availability of the documents that Mr. Bowen says is available?
All right, so let me start by saying to you, and with all due respect to you, I haven't heard what Mr. Bowen has said. And so I'm not going to, unless I hear it myself, I'm not going to be in a position to respond to anything Mr. Bowen has said publicly.
Yes.
What I can tell you, though, is that when I made the statement in Parliament, I had not spoken with Mr. Bowen, and Mr. Bowen had not spoken with me or with any other members of the technical working group when I made the statement in Parliament. I can say so categorically, and Mr. Bowen knows that. So if he says anything contrary-wise in terms of timing, then that would be false. So let me repeat. When I made the statement in Parliament, I had not spoken to Mr. Bowen. Mr. Bowen had not spoken to me, nor had he spoken to any members of the technical working group. Subsequent to, let me finish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes.
That statement in Parliament, and as part of my and the technical working groups and the Ministry of Finance, as well as the Ministry of Infrastructure, Public Utilities, etc., effort to, in fact, ascertain the state of the file and the whereabouts of the file. And after several questions, email chains, and follow-up with staff of the various ministries, we began to get pieces of the file and parts of the file. I was the one who reached out to the former Energy Minister and the former Minister of Finance and the former Minister of Public Works, Mr. Bowen, and asked to speak with him to seek his assistance in tracing the file. In that conversation, Mr. Bowen would have expressed then to me his disappointment that he thought the statement that we could not find the file somehow inadvertently or intentionally or unintentionally might have cast some sort of aspersion on it, and that he felt quite hurt about the matter. I made it clear to Mr. Bowen that I was merely stating the facts as I saw them, and that it in no way, shape, or form meant to say that he was personally responsible for any misplacement or disappearance of the file, and that the fact that I was following him and seeking his assistance clearly meant that there was an issue that we were trying to find, and he subsequently provided some information that allowed us to find some of the files, not all. And second, we would have in our engagements with GPG throughout the process indicated to them that we would want them to provide us with their file, assuming their file was complete, so that we could have had a proper assessment of that. And throughout that process, both perhaps before and after I spoke with Mr. Bowen, GPG would have provided documentation to us. So what I'm saying is, subject to timing, if what Mr. Bowen said, he was clear that that happened after my statement in Parliament, then there's no contradiction. If he's suggesting that those conversations between him, me, and the GPG exchange of files and so on happened prior to my statement in Parliament, and obviously from a timing point of view, he's mistaken.
Right. So the question I'm trying
here perhaps was paying particular attention to the time.
Right. Yes. And that is what needs clarification on. But therefore, has Mr. Bowen, based on what the working committee is doing, has Mr. Bowen offered his expertise or in terms of knowledge now, sharing that knowledge with the committee? Do you know if Mr. Bowen gave a commitment to doing that?
I can't speak to that. I certainly know in my conversation with him, in addition to the questions about the location of the file and him giving some pointers as to his historical recall and personnel in the ministry that he worked with, who would probably know where the files and so on. I think there would have been a general commitment to say if there's anything I can be of further assistance, let me know. But I can't say that specifically in relation to the committee because I'm not the only committee's meeting. Whether he's engaged directly with the committee and offered that specifically.
Now, Prime Minister, the final issue on oil and gas, and again, that was a third-party publication that speaks to a particular deal that one Nigerian company, Ocean Gate Oil and Gas, has gotten into with Global Petroleum Group. Is that a conversation that you had with Global Petroleum Group with respect to the development of oil and gas reserves in Grenada? Of course, the caveat here, and that we have to make this point, that Global Petroleum Group is a private company, and if they're making any arrangements to get into exploration, they're licensed within one block. I believe that's block 11 or block 22, based on my previous reporting on this issue. And there are other hydrocarbon resources out there. But is that a conversation that you had with GPG? Did GPG inform you? I mean, I don't think they are obligated to, but they might have contractual obligations too.
No, at this stage, I'm not aware that GPG has informed the technical working group or myself of that fact.
Okay. All right. All right. Very well. All right. You have nothing more to say to them on that issue there. It's a joke. Okay, folks. Okay, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, we're going to move on because I want to respect your time here. We're going to speak now to financial management and, of course, the current fiscal state of the Grenadian economy. Now, the government announced that the 2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure will be laid before the House of Parliament early next year, Prime Minister. But Section 25 of the Fiscal Management Act says that the estimates must be presented before the commencement of the fiscal year. Now, Prime Minister, how are you going to reconcile the presentation of the budget in 2025 against what the fiscal rules articulate here?
Well, you can continue reading the fiscal rules, Kelon, and you'd see it actually does permit for the budget to be laid to be laid after the traditional end of the period, as in you can go beyond December. There's certain rules that pertains to the ceiling expenditure that does not permit you to spend beyond a certain amount for the next 90-day period if you do not, in fact, lay the budget. But it doesn't prohibit the laying of the budget post the December 31st deadline. What it prohibits is really, or what it limits is your expenditure ceiling.
Just the expenditure ceiling. Okay. Now, concerning the supplementary estimates that is currently being implemented, that was approved for spending in September. Of course, regrettably, the opposition was not in Parliament to have a full-throated conversation on the supplementary estimates. However, we did assemble a panel of esteemed economists here on the Bubb Report who advises Prime Minister, especially in relation to the debt suspension clause. And we want to play a clip of what an economist here, two economists, that's Mr. Anthony Boson, as well as former Minister of Finance, as well as Mr. Cullen Gilchrist, who consults and advises the government on a myriad of matters. So let's play what they said.
But of course, debt suspension is always done to give more fiscal space, right? To spend on to focus on priority expenditure. That's the purpose of debt suspension. But it's really a postponement of your debt obligation, you know. And we are hoping that, remember, after the debt suspension clause, after the period expire, you know how to come back and service your debt. And you are hoping that the economy fiscally is healthier to take up from where you left off, right?
Right.
That's where the risk is. Because if after the period expire, the economy is not fiscally healthier, then you're in a worse off position. So I would always prefer that you band your belly, right? And go through the challenges associated with meeting your debt obligation. It's always a better fiscal discipline, right? And that to just quick grab onto. So that is my personal issue. That I don't think that the consequences are so drastic to warrant a suspension of this clause. Right?
That's the first thing if we agree fully. To me, it makes no sense, right? There's no need for that. Because here you identify additional spending of $269 million, and you're saying that you need not get involved in any debt to finance that. Yeah? What is the purpose of the debt suspension when your liability down the road will be even higher?
Prime Minister, why is Mr. Anthony Boson and Dr. Gilchrist wrong?
I don't think it's a question of right or wrong. I think this is a question of understanding what your immediate needs and priorities are. So it's always good to sit back in the armchair and be armchair policymaker with 2020 vision hindsight. The bottom line is you have to balance fiscal discipline, which obviously is a good thing, with meeting the needs of your people. And the understanding is simple. If we took the position of not suspending the debt clause, it means we do not have that additional cash flow that we may need, and therefore we would not, if we turned out that we needed it, be in a position to get it. So it is better for us to be in a position where we have that space if needed than not. Because what are we dealing with here? We are dealing here with rebuilding substantial parts of the economy. And in order to do so, we have to finance it. It's that simple. Right? So the millions and millions of dollars that is needed to build homes in Carrickfergus and Petit Martinique, but that is needed to give assistance to business people and so on. All of this has to be factored in. Now, we have to appreciate something. It is not just the expenditure that the government has to make to build back Carrickfergus and Petit Martinique better. It is also the fact that we are giving up revenue. Let's be clear. We waived and zero-rated all building materials, all household appliances, all of the things you need to rebuild a home and to rebuild communities. So people are importing items, all of the building materials and so on that are being imported into Grenada and are related to Hurricane Beryl. The government is not going to get any revenue, right? All of the household items and so on, the government is not going to get any revenue. So from a revenue collection point of view, you actually will have less cash flow. So if you take the less cash flow that you have, and you go and you pay your debts, long-term debts, to international bondholders and so on, and you find yourself not having the fiscal space, meaning actual cash, to then rebuild, to then meet your normal commitments to your domestic suppliers, your contractors, your construction, your police, your teachers, etc., etc. At that point in time, you can't go back to the bondholders and say, can I suspend or can I not pay? You then be in default. So the question here in the circumstance is, should we be cautious? Should we be prudent? Or should we say, okay, we're going to ban our belly and hope that our cash flows allow us to meet our obligations when they fall due, while at the same time paying our debt? The other thing that I'm saying the 2020 hindsight revisionists fail to appreciate is we are not yet out of the woods. The hurricane season isn't really over. If you check the temperatures in Grenada right now, and you check the sea, and you see
the ocean temperatures are astronomically high.
Right, there is still a real risk of further climatic events, and therefore we could not take the chance of simply saying, you know what, let's ban our belly. If this storm hit us this time of the year, then obviously the fiscal year is run. You probably will cross your fingers and say, all things being equal, we will not get another major climatic event for the next 6 months, and therefore let us continue paying our debt. But this thing happened very early in hurricane season. We've seen, for example, some countries much larger than us have gotten the double whammy. You've just seen what happened in a place like Spain, for example, a much more developed where the debt toll was far greater than anything we experienced in Grenada, where the unpreparedness was quite clear. So what I'm saying is, and I've said this before, if I have to choose between servicing debt and servicing the people of Grenada, there's no choice. We will service the people of Grenada. So the debt suspension was really an opportunity for us to make sure that, one, we were cautious and prudent, and that we gave the Ministry of Finance and the government of Grenada as much cash flow and flexibility as possible to meet not just the immediate, because remember, it is rarely in 2025 that you're going to have to spend a lot of money on things like rebuilding the schools in Carriacou, rebuilding all the health centers. And we have to understand it is going to be expensive because we don't have the labor. So it is likely we are going to have to import labor, not just import them, but house them, feed them. Probably have to pay more than you ordinarily would have had to in order to get that level of built development taking place in a quick enough time. So if you don't understand that, and you just want to, in a sense, sit and play accountant or theoretical economist, then obviously it's easy to say, look, ban your belly, and there's no need for it, and therefore continue paying the debt. But at the end of the day, it's long-term debt. We appreciate it goes back at the end of it, but we can certainly monitor and decide we suspend, and for example, we don't pay for 1 year, and put that on the back end. That gives us that breathing space within that 1 year. And because 1 year is such a short space of time, 6 months from now, we'll be back in the hurricane season again. Right? And so we need that potential contingency and that freedom to operate.
Yeah. And Prime Minister, just as a follow-up with this, and I did raise that question with you and Dr. Ralph Gonzalez in one of the post-disaster briefings, I believe, that was held, that might have been back in July, I believe. And that has to do, Prime Minister, with the formula that the Bretton Woods institutions use to make the determination that as middle-income countries, or high-income countries rather, middle-income countries, that's their designation, that we do not qualify for a lot of the grants that are required. And so we as developing states are placed into this conundrum where we are still confronted with these development challenges that are brought about by hurricanes that can essentially destroy the entire GDP of a country in the space of several hours. Yes, but we are still undergirded by that particular formula that the Bretton Woods institutions use to treat with issues of debt management, fiscal management, and those issues. How do we get out of that particular system? Do you see us as the pivot to Africa, for example, with respect to the Afrexim Bank and with things like BRICS coming on stream, as perhaps ways that we can decouple ourselves from that particular formula that we are chained to?
Well, I think we've already begun doing some work in that area, and particularly for small island developing states, the multi-vulnerability index is one of the tools that we have championed and put a lot of effort, work, and energy into getting the international community, particularly the international financing, multilateral financing institutions, to appreciate that you can't punish a country simply because by the sweat of their brow, small islands have worked hard to pull themselves up by their bootstrap and to try and increase the real income per capita of its citizens, and in exchange turn around and say, well, you will not qualify for concessional financing, when these very small island developing states are the ones bearing the brunt of the climatic events. And as you said, in a space of a couple hours, our GDP is wiped out. So we have to point out that vulnerability. That's essentially what the multi-vulnerability index is pointing out, is that you can't just use income per capita alone as a determinant of who should get or not get concessional financing and kind of institutional support that is required. And we are saying vulnerability, and the multi-vulnerability index is one such tool that ought to be used. And you can simply take vulnerability to climatic conditions and weather conditions as one vulnerability. And you would see immediately, therefore, if you use that as a matrix, that most small island developing states in the Caribbean and the Pacific would therefore ought to almost immediately qualify for concessional financing, for debt relief, and so on, especially where the debt is debt to rebuild after climatic events caused by obviously the warming ocean temperatures, sea level rises, and really the carbon challenge that we face. So that's just one example. But I think that the broader strategy for us is really, we have to become friends of all, enemies of none. We really have to sort of take almost Switzerland-like approach, I think, to many of these issues, because at the end of the day, we are small. When the big elephants are fighting, we as the small ants could easily get trampled. And the consequences of a lot of the geopolitical tensions in the world today have been quite disastrous for us when it comes to things like cost of living and so on. And so
imported inflation, if food security, all of those issues, yes.
So in Grenada's case, we have a double whammy. You've got a terrible hurricane that has destroyed all of our main agricultural sectors. And then you have geopolitical tensions that leads to us importing food that is probably not the healthiest, but also very expensive. And then you can't supplement that with your own local food supply because of the interruption caused by the hurricane. So for us, advocating so that the multilateral institutions truly understand that, our leaders are not saying this because it's sexy to say, or because we're begging or we're coming cap in hand. We are saying these are real, significant negative economic and fiscal impacts that we are suffering, which has really nothing to do with our own behavior. So in a sense, looking at other partners, whether it's Africa, on the African continent, whether it's China, India, South America, Latin America, in addition to the traditional North American, Canadian, Western Europe, is all part and parcel of what we have to do, because we have to be able to find friends wherever who are prepared to understand our situation and help us.
Especially those decolonized friends, Prime Minister. I'm sure that you and I would agree with that. Now, Prime Minister, let us move on quickly to the CBI program. Now, recent data from the government reveal a revenue windfall. Prime Minister, are you there?
I'm here.
Yes, yeah, okay, very well. All right. Reveal a revenue windfall from the sale of passports, or the CBI program. Now, the data reveals that out of the 4,861 successful new CBI applicants, only 770 contributed to the National Transformation Fund, and just over 1,000 invested in real estate, not healthcare or sports or other areas, Prime Minister, just real estate. And of course, the National Transformation Fund, which we cannot overlook. What other specific projects, however, can you point to that these new investors will be bringing to the national economy?
Well, no, I mean, I think you pointed out that obviously the historical context for the CBI in the private sector has been driven by real estate tourism development projects. And so those are the projects that to a large extent are ongoing. And oftentimes developers tend to focus on. But the National Transformation Fund is really the government or the state of Grenada's fund. And the government therefore has widespread flexibility as to how it deploys that fund. You would recall that in Parliament, we amended the legislation to make sure that a certain percentage of the National Transformation Fund was actually set aside and funded, paid in and held at account to the central bank to make sure that we can treat with climatic events and national emergencies, just like Hurricane Beryl. So again, we go back to the private sector. A lot of the private development is private sector led. And while the government can certainly encourage, certainly from a fiscal perspective, the activities that the private sector may choose to get in, the government cannot dictate the activity. So you've pointed out, for example, education and healthcare. And so there are no, as far as I'm aware, any projects developed by the private sector which seeks to target education and healthcare specifically. But it doesn't mean that there may not be opportunities for doing so. And I'm just saying off the top, for example, we have to finance the construction of a new hospital. And certainly CBI is a potential tool for doing so, either directly from the National Transformation Fund or from developing of a specific CBI development project that will look to target the healthcare. We can look at skills training and technical, vocational, and digital training. We can look at STEM or STEAM, and for the purposes of STEAM, including the arts as part of that. And those things could be developed either by the private sector or the government can certainly specifically channel the fund in it. So I think we have certainly concentrated on the National Transformation Fund because obviously that's direct revenue for the state of Grenada. And we're also mindful that we have to have the right balance, because if we, in a sense, tilt the industry in such a way that the National Transformation Fund becomes the dominant one, it also, in a sense, squeezes out the private sector. And then it puts the government in a position where it then still has to leverage that National Transformation Fund to then deploy it into the economy to then try and activate private sector investment. So I think we do want the balance between the National Transformation Fund and direct private sector investment, because we don't get a lot of foreign direct investment in the Caribbean anymore, or at all in many instances. And if you look at our tourism sector, you'd see that a lot of the investment has come via CBI, save for the Silver Sands Hotel, which was built by Mr. Saweri with his own funding. Almost all of the tourism product that has been developed in recent time has been CBI driven. That's because there's just a dearth of foreign direct investment that comes in directly. And that's one of the challenges that many of middle-income countries face, because you don't have one concessional financing. So private sector persons find it hard to pay the kinds of interest rates that are asked for by many of the lending institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Prime Minister, quickly, we're going to move on to hospital statutorization. Now, can you confirm the date of the implementation of the hospital statutorization?
No, I can't confirm the date. Statutorization is going to be a process. I am aware that the Minister of Health has indicated the 1st of January as the start.
Well, yes, he did. That was going to be my follow-up question.
Right. Well, I think it's really I think the Minister is speaking to the process, not the conclusion, right? Because effectively it has to start, and it will take quite a while for that transitioning to take place. I mean, creating a statutory body, even if the legislation exists already, requires a number of things. You got to have boards, you got to have organizational chart, you got to restructure the organization, you got to open bank accounts, you have to hire people. All of those things have to happen. So if you are creating a situation where you are creating an entirely new statutory body from scratch that has its own challenges, where you are looking to transition existing entities already and turn them into a statutory body, that also has its own nuances and challenges that you have to factor in. So I think what the Minister was signaling is the government's intent to in fact take on this process. I think come January. We're obviously 2 months before the end of the year, today being the 3rd of November. And so it's not a situation where we are saying the statutorization will complete on the 1st of 3rd of January, whatever is the first working day in 2025.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we do have the blueprint, Prime Minister, in the Grenada Hospitals Authority Act. That's Act number 4 of 1998. I'm not too sure if you had an opportunity to examine that act. I'm not too sure why it was not implemented since 1998. We're in 2024, but that's another story. But have you and the administration had a chance to look at the act, to examine perhaps what limitations exist in the act, and would there be any amendments to the act before legislation is brought to Parliament for passage?
I have not studied the act personally in detail, but I know the Minister of Health and his team have been looking at the act. So in a sense, I think from a policy perspective, he would have to sort of drive that initiative together with the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the Attorney General's chambers. But if something was enacted, 20-something plus years ago, I'm sure there's always room to improve on it. And if there's an opportunity to do so, it will certainly make sense.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Now, the government has articulated the what, Prime Minister. We've heard about what Mount Sinai will be doing. We know about the new hospital site. Some are saying that that part of is actually in St. David's. I think that's in St. David's, not St. George's. I have a bias here for St. David's. You can imagine that. But let us talk about the how in respect of cost here. The previous prime minister put in place a formula for implementing national health insurance. Now, in all of the public conversations on reform of healthcare in Grenada, the question of national health insurance has not been featured prominently, even though a blueprint was left. And so the question is, how would national insurance be part of the statutorization process? Because you would imagine that there has to be some kind of funding formula, some kind of revenue generation formula that a statutory entity would be using.
So, I mean, I'm not a technician, so I in a sense, that's a very highly technical question, and I don't think that I am competent to answer it on the how. But I would say, from a policy perspective, we certainly support having a national health insurance, particularly for major medicals, which is where oftentimes personal bankruptcy happens. If you do not have a buffer that allows you to pay for major medicals, surgeries, and so on. We're not talking about a dental visit that costs $100 or so. So we have, in fact, over the last year, continued with the consultant that the former administration had retained to assist it with trying to move the NHI process forward. And we've been reviewing the situation. The truth is, we have to start somewhere, and I think too oftentimes part of the challenge is we make perfect the enemy of the good by trying to perfect things before we start, and as a result, we never start because perfection is not possible. So we certainly recognize that from the point of view of, if we go to a statutory model, and to your point, then obviously it has to be revenue. There has to be a revenue generation capacity, because the statutory body will have to be able to meet its obligations. And oftentimes, one of the advantages of having a statutory body is to wean it off the excessive dependence on government subvention or only government revenue, but to give it additional opportunities to earn revenue. So we certainly think insurance, whether it's a national health insurance or private health insurance, would play a key role in that. Fee for service, we think, would play a key role in that, meaning people pay for the services they get. And then an appropriate costing model. You see, one of the challenges we have with the existing healthcare sector is that we don't cost anything. What we do is we have a situation where the government creates a budget every year, and in a sense, that budget is assigned to the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Health is expected to administer that budget. But we don't actually pay attention to what the cost of anything is, and then try to use a cost-based method to then determine, whether we then add a markup on this, or whether we then add some sort of profit on this, or we factor in the labor cost, the electricity cost, and then say this properly is the price for the service you are getting. And as a result of that, we really, in a sense, put ourselves at a disadvantage, because there may genuinely be cases where, and many cases where people can afford to pay for the service, but because we don't take a cost plus approach either to how we look at healthcare, then the state and the taxpayers end up bearing the brunt of it. And I want to make this point because, as I've said on other fora, the average Grenadian starts their healthcare journey, regrettably, by going to a private doctor who charges them. Even though there's quote-unquote free healthcare, even though you can walk into the medical and health centers and not pay, right? They are choosing to go, and we can obviously examine the reasons why, but it's not as if paying for healthcare services is something that's alien or unknown to the vast members of the public.
And that is a very good point, Prime Minister. And in the conversation last week that we had with the Minister of Health, and of course the nurse on the panel, we also made the point that sometimes we think that, yes, you go into a private facility to get care, but when, I can't use that word, we are on air, but when the ish hits the fan, right, they end up taking the patient to the hospital in any event.
All the time. It's a bit of a mirage, right? It's a bit of an illusion, and hence the reason. There are two things I'm a big champion of. I'm a champion of quality public healthcare, and a champion of quality public education. Because ultimately, if you don't have those things, then you are not going to be able to continually rise those who are less fortunate out of their situation and give them the chance to become the next generation of middle class or even wealthier persons to help. So we have to sort of appreciate that we shouldn't necessarily lack confidence in public education or public healthcare, and it's not every time merely paying for it means that it's better. But at the same time, if there are issues with it, we certainly need to work towards improving the quality of it.
Yes, absolutely, Prime Minister. And of course, before people get to the health center, they have to engage in preventative health. I know that's difficult in respect of food, but exercise, diet, and exercise. A lot of these issues are non-communicable issues that our population really needs to speak to as well. So I think that is a conversation that needs to be had there as well. Now, Prime Minister, what we will do now is to take a quick break and come back with the second segment of this interview, because I want to respect your time. So viewers and listeners, we're having conversation here with the Prime Minister of Grenada, the Honorable Dickon Mitchell, and we will be right back after a word again from our sponsors, and we will come back to close the program. Please stand by.
Don't go there.
You are a technocrat. I mean, you can speak to whether or not it was appropriate or inappropriate for that to occur. Would you have done that as a permanent secretary?
Politicians get the information from wherever source that they can.
That's going to be the extent of your answer.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
There's a lot of noise around the data protection bill that, in my respectful view, is not warranted.
I was one of those making noise, and it's simply because I was concerned about that specific section 33.
Don't go there.
Are you going to be offering yourself up as political leader of the party?
I see you've called me here for much more than diplomatic passports. I don't mind that.
Don't go there.
What is the relationship like between you and your leader, Dr. Mitchell, your boss, Dr. Mitchell?
I'm not sure how to explain how to answer this question at this time. I prefer not to answer.
Don't go there.
They said that you approached the bank for the loan before the election and that it only materialized after the election. There are also conflicting reports around the quantity of monies that were received. What is the reality here?
People try to extort the truth and to make all kinds of things about it. I just keep quiet. So if you notice, I was really and truly quiet about the whole matter.
Well, except with not with the New Today newspaper. The New Today newspaper reported on this, so I'm not sure you were quiet on this. Go ahead, Honorable. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to answer your question, right?
Don't go there.
I think we just spoke at length about the regularization framework. So
yes, we did. But let us talk, Prime Minister. Let us talk about the workers who are dismissed.
The Bubb Report. We go there.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style. And so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
This is a very interesting question.
The Bubb Report with Dr. Kellon Bubb. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Of course, we are in conversation with Grenada's Prime Minister, the Honorable Dickon Mitchell, on issues animating national development in the state of Grenada following the passage of Hurricane Beryl, as well as a number of other developments in the health sector that are of critical importance to the national community. Of course, we are now going to segue into having a conversation about the 2025 fiscal year. Of course, 2025, Prime Minister, will be your government's midterm mark in office. And unlike the United States, there are no midterm elections in Grenada. But I suspect that perhaps you have been doing some on-the-ground analysis of your administration's performance. Has there been any polling done, internal polling that you want to share with the Bubb Report, sir? Your midterm performance?
Well, I assume you're doing the polling, Kellon. When you poll yourself, there's obviously a bias that is inbuilt, that is difficult to discount or get rid of. But nonetheless, I think for us, we do have to assess our performance. We do have to, more importantly, get the public's feedback from our performance, and I think we've been doing that. I think we're always gauging our performance. You know, it's good to get feedback. It's why we have town hall meetings. It's why we have village and group meetings, to hear people candidly say what their view is. I certainly can say, if there's one area where I think the public would be happy in, is the fact that the public can speak candidly, freely, without any fear of victimization, or without any fear of anyone doing them or threatening them, or anything like that. So certainly,
well, except Prime Minister, sometimes your supporters are up in arms. Why are you asking the Prime Minister that, this, that, the other? But
that's part of the freedom. That's part
of the freedom. Yes,
it's part of the freedom of expression. So, so certainly on that score, I think even I can say quite objectively, you know, we are happy to have people comment and speak, and in an era of social media, it's almost the wild west, and people can say and put out pretty much anything. I certainly think there are other areas where, you know, if we took up our manifesto mandate, there are very clear and distinct areas that we can tick as having accomplished in meaningful ways. That demonstrates, I think, that we've been consistent in terms of working towards the mandate that we campaigned on. There are some that we still have some significant work to do. For example, I could pull in a sense an arbitrary one. If we take the whole issue of marijuana decriminalization, that has not happened fast enough. But a lot of work is going on, in a sense, behind the scenes. In fact, I think this weekend a team journeyed to St. Vincent to attend their marijuana
for the marijuana festival. I wish I was there. I wouldn't say why I wish I was there.
You know, but you know, so obviously there's some that we still need to continue working on. But it's also important for us to signal to the public, you know, that nation building is a process, and that if we don't appreciate that, oftentimes we are going to make short-term decisions that may give us instant gratification, but in the long run may have dire consequences for actions and our behavior. So it's important for us to also, in instances where things will take a while, simply because you're building, or you have to build the foundation properly to make sure you can get it done right. It is not something that's going to happen instantly. So I could take, for example, something like TVET education and introductions of skills training. In addition to, let's say, building the physical infrastructure of a skills training center, you have to find the human resource capacity, which is the teachers, who have to have that skill and that knowledge to be able to impart it. If you don't have the teachers who have that, you then either have to find them, train them themselves before they can go and deploy, or you're going to have to import the labor to do so. So some of those critically important nation building issues will take some time, and there's no other way to do it, because there's just no shortcut for some of those issues. But I would say certainly from a scorecard point of view, we've certainly made, in my view, made good in large measure in a very short space of time on some of the most significant contributions that we've said we were going to treat with. On the political front, obviously our style of politics in the Caribbean and in Grenada is very personal, and so we know that people, in a sense,
too personal.
You know, but until we get to the point where we can change that, you know, it is what it is. And obviously, oftentimes our constituents want to socialize with us, want to see us, want to hear and be in touch with us. And I would probably say everywhere I go, I'm sure there's always a request for more of that. But that obviously our MPs and caretakers will have to bear in mind, because at the end of the day, the people are the boss. But also it's important for us to also help with educating our population, that you actually do want good governance. You do want persons who have a vision, and who actually at the end of their 5 or 10 year tenure can look back and you can point to the things they've done to enhance the community and the society, but not just who socialized with you, or who was empathetic, or who was there in social gatherings, or who was on the block or in the rum shop with you. You actually do want someone who would have put in place an education policy that allowed your child to get access to MCC without having to pay on euro, so that they in turn can make something of themselves. And you do want someone who puts, you know, the necessary infrastructure in place to make sure our roads are better, you know, or ports or airports are renovated and are functioning, who's introducing technology to digitize things to make it more efficient and so on. So we have to find the right balance. And I think for us as a government, we do appreciate that there's a balance between governance and being available to serve and represent your constituents.
Now, in respect of the performance of your ministers, any second thoughts around their performance? Have you lost confidence in anyone else, Prime Minister, or are there areas of improvement? Because, of course, in reviewing your performance, I would imagine that you would want to have a review of their individual performances, not only as ministers, but in their performance as parliamentary representatives as well.
That's well, I don't lose confidence in people easily, Kelon. That's one. No, I have not lost confidence in anyone else. And that's, I think, pretty self-evident. And we are constantly assessing ourselves. Peer review and peer evaluation is something I'm very keen on, and that includes me. In fact, it starts with me. I have to be prepared to subject myself to the review of my colleagues in terms of my leadership, in terms of my own performance, the review of my constituents, from the branch members to the constituency executive, to the PD groups. I also have to subject myself to their review. If they don't think they see me enough, responsive enough, or I'm addressing concerns they have, then they have the opportunity to tell me that and to hold my feet to the fire. And that standard applies to all of our ministers, all of our MPs, senators. And as you're aware, we have our General Council this afternoon, starting at 1 p.m. at the Westall Secondary School. And that's another opportunity for our delegates to hold our feet to the fire and to hold us accountable and to make sure that we are delivering on the things that we need to do. So certainly, peer review, individual review, group review is something that's always ongoing in the National Democratic Congress. They don't call us democratic for no reason.
Well, Prime Minister, you did not specifically answer the question there on the specific areas of improvement.
No, I mean, so let me give an example, Kelon.
Yes.
I've heard from many members of the public saying that the party and the government's communication and PR needs to be improved. And you may say, if I wasn't listening, then I wouldn't be on the Bubb Show today. I noticed you started off by saying that I only come on my anniversary. I've been on, for the last 10 days, I've been on radio.
Multiple platforms, correct.
Multiple platforms. That means I'm listening. On one of the platforms, someone said, are you having the show early in the morning? People going to work and have to work. They're not going to be able to hear what you have to say. So that has given me thought to say, okay, perhaps therefore, how do we create an evening platform where perhaps there's less rush and people can hear what we have to say? Obviously, Hurricane Beryl derailed, in a sense, the continuous smooth operations of the state. And so we have not had any major turmoils since Beryl. We've had all our press conferences and so on specific to Beryl. The Ministry of Youth and Sport is right now having youth talk, which has been a tremendous success. Deluxe Cinema in Grenville, GBSS Auditorium, Westall Secondary School, several hundreds of young people, and in particular young men, which I was really impressed with, came out to share and give their views and thoughts on everything, from government's performance.
A lot of those young people were very impressive, I have to say.
Absolutely.
Very impressive. I had a chance to listen to them, and the future is bright with them around.
So I was just using that point to say, as a collective, we've heard the criticism about communication and PR, and it is something that I think we have to take to heart and to see how we can improve on. So I was just giving that as an example, both from a political and from a governance point of view. And I'm sure there are other several areas that we can work on, and that's the whole point. Our aim is always to be striving to improve. We may not always get there at the first or second try, but certainly the willingness to continue is always there.
Yeah, absolutely, Prime Minister. Two final issues, because I know you have to go. Let us talk about the 2025 legislative agenda. Now, in the throne speech, the government only highlighted 4 legislative areas, namely the procurement legislation. I know that there were recent tweaks to it. I suspect that there would be an overhaul on that issue. Energy efficiency legislation, deposit insurance legislation, and of course the big one, pension reform legislation, Prime Minister. Now, what is missing there for me, at least, for a practitioner, is the freedom of information legislation that practitioners like myself would find very handy in being able to access public information by way of the government. Is there a reason why the Freedom of Information Act, Prime Minister, has not been legislated as yet?
No, I think, to be honest, it's perhaps just been a question of perhaps the media hasn't been pushing us enough. You have to appreciate that legislation.
Well, I'm speaking for me. I'm pushing now for me.
Right.
I can't.
Well, then I would certainly invite the Media Workers Association to help us.
Yes.
No, I don't say that in jest, because as a government, it's easy to get distracted. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone And I don't mean an agenda in a negative sense. I'm saying, you know, on any given day, you have different stakeholders who are advocating for policy initiatives on any different thing. And with limited legislative time and with so many other demands on one, if there isn't sometimes a driver to sort of hold the government accountable within any time frame, even with the best of intentions, things can slip. So I certainly think it's not because we object to a Freedom of Information Act. I actually have no difficulty with it, because I think I've been on record as saying sometimes I find the government to be a secret service. And I'm not the government, and people have to understand that. I mean, I hold an office in the government, but the government is a much larger apparatus. And sometimes even me as Prime Minister find it incredibly difficult to get information from the government, and more importantly, ensure that the public has information. So one of the things that I certainly think from a bureaucracy point of view that the government has to get better at is just simply letting the public know how to access, for example, the government services. And one of the clear signs of that failure is the fact that so many people come directly to the politician, to the Member of Parliament's office, to ask for basic information about basic government services that the government should be making known to the public in a much more clear, concise, and user-friendly environment. So, for example, let's take taxation. No citizen really should be coming to the Member of Parliament about taxation, right? You know, between the Customs and Excise Division, the Inland Revenue Division, you know, those departments should be very clear and very user-friendly about the types of tax, the rates of tax, how you pay for it. We should be deploying technology, and there has been significant improvement in that regard. I will certainly say so, in terms of ability to pay taxes online and so on, so that it becomes a friendly, civil, pleasant exchange between the citizen and the government department that's serving them. And so we need a lot more of that. You know, passport, for example. The passport office is one of those offices that has made tremendous strides over the years and has really become a beacon of professionalism. And so you don't really find, in my view, many people now asking you how to get a passport, or where to go to get a passport, or the cost, or the process for it, because I think they've done a good enough job of simplifying that so that the public, for the most part, gets it and they understand. We need other departments to take a similar approach, so that we become a lot more citizen-centric, and a lot more focused on asking us how can we better improve the service that we deliver to the citizens. And the first thing, obviously, is information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And well, Prime Minister, I will be pressing you on this, but let me just make the point quickly here before we get to the last segment, that in all my years of doing the Bubb Report, we're going into our 5th year next year, you've been the only Prime Minister to ever grace us with your presence, and every time an invitation has been extended, there was never a turn down. You never said no. I can't say the same for some of your ministers, but in general, I think there has been open communication with you, and perhaps that's might be a function of the fact that we went to PBC, but so did your predecessor. He also went to PBC, but he does not come on this platform, so I don't know why. But certainly I would agree with you there.
I'll put in a word for you.
Well, okay. All right, Prime Minister, finally, let's get to the state of the National Democratic Congress. Today is your party's General Council. Of course, in the opposition, we saw a riot act being read by the leader of that party against one of the persons who might be, contesting the leadership. You said of that person, give it to Pedro. I don't know if that's what he was talking about. But, Prime Minister, you're going into General Council with the resignation of a former celebrated NDC caretaker candidate and Minister Jonathan Leclerc. I know you've said on several occasions, Prime Minister, I saw all of the interviews you did with Callistra and others, as well as the press conference, that you will not speak to the reasons why you have lost confidence in Mr. Leclerc. But the question remains, Prime Minister, is the loss of confidence in Mr. Leclerc related to disagreements over how both of you handled allegations of conflict of interest with members of the lottery and stadium boards? Is there a gag order placed on Mr. Leclerc so that he cannot speak on those issues as well? What is the reality here, Minister? Because both of you gentlemen seem very opaque to really articulate and flesh out why you lost that confidence. I'm trying one last time.
Obviously, I can't have a gag order on anybody. I'm not a judge in a court. And as you've indicated, yes, Mr. Leclerc has resigned as a member of the National Democratic Congress. And so even if you think that it was a gag order, he's no longer a member of the party. And so He's free to speak, and I'm free to speak. And as I said, one of the things we have to appreciate, I think, about political life as well is that too often we, frankly, say stuff that should simply remain confidential. When I asked any member of the National Democratic Congress to serve in the cabinet, and they agreed graciously to accept that responsibility. It's a heavy responsibility. I completely accept that because I serve in the cabinet. And if we get to a point where, as a prime minister, I lose confidence in them, I honestly don't think it is in their interest or my interest, even if the laundry is dirty, to wash it in public. That's not me. That's not my style. You probably even notice oftentimes I don't even criticize the opposition. And the reason for that is because we need to, I think, stay focused on policy and not personality. And I appreciate it's a little more salivating, it's a little more exciting.
But except in this case, but no, Prime Minister, except in this case with Mr. Lecret, there is an issue here of policy as well in respect of the governance of or his functioning as minister in a particular ministry in which he had policy disagreements, or at least the allegation is that he had policy disagreements with you over the functioning of the state statutory board.
No, I'm saying, is that has he said so? I've not heard him say so. I've heard.
But no, he has. We've heard.
That's what I'm saying. So he has not said so. I have not said so, and I'm saying that people are just simply making those allegations and asking us, me in particular, to be drawn into that. And I've said no. So the point I'm making is, if as I've said clearly, that I was not going to disclose the reasons why I lost confidence. You asked me specifically if the reason I lost confidence is because there's a difference in our views as to functioning, as to the issue of a conflict of interest over the NLA. And I'm saying to you, no, that's not the reason why I would have lost confidence in him.
Oh, so that was not the reason at all. On Callistra's narrative, Prime Minister, you said that you also looked into those allegations at the NLA and you found nothing. Why don't you allow an independent body to do that work as opposed to you?
No. I'm saying to you, I think the question was whether or not well, let me see how I understood Callistra's question to be whether or not the issues or the allegation raised would warrant me satisfied that there was a conflict of interest that would warrant action. And I'm saying the warranting of action is where I felt it didn't warrant action. Let me put it this way: on any given day, people make comments or raise queries about things from fees people earn, or whether, and I think I was giving a specific request where I said our laws for most of the statutory bodies contemplate that a director or a manager or an employee may find himself in a position where they may have a material interest in a contract that comes before the board or the department or the entity. And the law clearly stipulates what has to happen. And I'm saying it says, for instance, that you have to disclose that you have the interest. You have to disclose and therefore recuse yourself from any potential decision-making that may happen. And I was making that point, that conflict of interest, because of the size of our country, and even in large countries, of necessity will happen. And in those circumstances, the question of managing the conflict of interest. And I can give you a good example. I'm no longer practicing my law firm, Mitchell & Co., but I'm obviously a co-owner of the firm. From time to time, the firm may represent clients or may have interests, clients who have interest in a matter that treats with the government or may come before cabinet. Once I appreciate or I recognize that it's a matter involving my firm, what I'm required to do is to disclose to my colleagues or to the cabinet secretary that my firm has an interest in this matter, i.e. it is representing someone. And in the circumstances, I'd ask to be recused from the cabinet so that someone else would chair the cabinet and they can make their decision. Right. So I'm saying, in a sense, that's the perfect sort of thing that can happen. Or my firm could just decide that anytime there's somebody who comes to them who involves the government for anything that's potentially litigious or not, it may even just be a contract, that they could not take the matter. And that's a matter for the firm to make. But I'm saying, in a small place like Grenada, if most people took that approach, they wouldn't be able to live because the government is the single biggest employer and, in a sense, the biggest mover of the economy. And so if you took that strict an approach to it, then people literally wouldn't be able to function in many instances. And then the final point I was making, frankly, is that a lot of those who are flagging those issues have no moral or legal authority to raise them, because you just have to look at their own track record. Because they probably didn't even understand the concept of what conflict of interest meant. So that's the broader point I think or the points I wanted to make.
Okay, all right. Finally, Prime Minister, let us talk about your General Secretary, Mr. Larry Barry. Now, some surrogates in the NDC, some of the enthusiastic surrogates who are on the airwaves every day in Grenada and in the UK have been calling for his resignation. But more so, some disaffected members of the NDC executive in the UK have complained about him and UK chapter chairman, Mr. Roy McEwen. There was a letter penned by Mr. John Nichols, who is a former member of the executive in the UK, and he expressed concerns over the performance of the General Secretary. In looking at Mr. Larry Barry's performance as General Secretary, have you lost confidence in him?
Well, I don't appoint any officers to the executive of the National Democratic Congress. They're appointed by the delegates. We have a democratic process. Conventions take place, and when the conventions occur, persons put themselves up for running, and they're elected. The same applied to me. Save for the political leader, certainly while he holds the office of Prime Minister. Every other position on the national executive is up for grabs at every convention. And in my view, our delegates clearly had confidence in Mr. Barry when they re-elected him. When the next convention comes around, which is going to be next year, the delegates would have an opportunity to again poll and determine whether Mr. Barry comes back or whether any other officer who currently holds position on the national executive will come back. And as I said, we're a democratic process. People are always free to express their view as to whether they support or hold confidence in any individual. But to me, this is much ado about nothing. On any given day, someone may say they support you, they don't support you. They're entitled to that view, but what really counts is the poll, and that poll is determined by the delegates on the day of the convention.
Absolutely. Prime Minister, thank you so much for appearing on this week's edition of the Bubb Report. I do want to give you an opportunity for some closing comments as you head to the NDC General Council in our home parish of St. David's.
Thank you. Maybe I could end on that note, just to signal to the public that the National Democratic Congress is alive, it's well, it's strong, it is kicking, it is democratic. Our internal organs and institutions are well working, are well functioning. We've held all our general councils. We are going to be having our convention next year to continue making sure that we continue to internalize the process of democracy and continue to grow the party. And so this is an open call for all of those who have political ambition in one way, shape, or form, who want to join a progressive political institution that is taking Grenada forward. You're welcome to sign up for membership in the National Democratic Congress. That includes members of the media as well. I
don't know why. I don't know why members of the
joining any political organization, and we need to make politics more attractive and more positive, because that's the only way in which you will get good policy making. So we need to make sure we don't create an environment where good people stay away from the political environment, because there's a famous saying that if good people stay away from politics, then be prepared to be governed by the not so good, or if smart people stay away from politics, be prepared to be governed by the not so smart. So we all have a part to play in one way, shape, or form in building our nation. That includes members of the media in doing a good job as well as members of the media. So I want to thank you, sir, as part of the Fourth Estate, for continuing to blaze the trail of the Fourth Estate, and for continuing to hold people like myself in public life and public office accountable. Thank you.
Prime Minister, thank you so much for appearing on the Bubb Report this week, and all the very best on your General Council today. Viewers and listeners, the Honorable Prime Minister of Grenada, Dickon Mitchell, Member of Parliament for St. David, he joined us for an extensive conversation on a range of issues animating life in the national community in Grenada. Of course, on behalf of the producers of the Bubb Report, I am your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb, thanking you for tuning in to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style, and so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
This is a very interesting question.
The Bubb Report with Dr. Kellon Bubb. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.